Joining us now to break down this divide and what it means for the 2020 race is Isabel Brown, a contributor for Turning Point USA. So Isabel, the whole idea of a moderate versus progressive divide, it's something that isn't necessarily new, but do you think it's growing within the Democratic Party?
I certainly do. And I think this growing divide between moderate voters on the left and the really extreme progressive left has been happening for several years now in the United States, but really started to come to a head in 2016 when progressive voters felt incredibly disenfranchised by the Democrat Party. Fast forward to now in the 2020 election cycle, you're seeing the progressive ideology of the more radical left start to take over the Democrat Party, and now moderates are also feeling disenfranchised by the Democrat Party. So I think we're seeing a stark shift in tone from the other side of the aisle, and I'm eager to see what that looks like in terms of election results in November.
I think you're right. I think to some degree there's a realignment taking place within the Democratic Party, but really all of politics for that matter, which we'll get to in a second. But when it comes to the Democratic Party, I think a lot of the establishment figures see their grasp on power slowly slipping away, and they no longer have the same control that they used to over these progressives who are now, as you said, taking over the Democratic Party to some degree. And you mentioned the idea that they didn't necessarily all support Hillary Clinton in 2016, and you're right on for saying that. So do you think that this election cycle, there's once again an opportunity for Republicans and the Trump campaign in particular to reach out to those progressives who may feel disenfranchised within the Democratic Party?
Absolutely, and nothing could have illustrated that better than the stark difference between the DNC and the RNC as Americans watched the two major political parties battle it out for our vote as we get closer to Election Day. With the DNC, you saw such a tone of doom and gloom, how much we hate America, how it's a miserable place to live, and, all of that can be blamed on one side of the political aisle. But on the other hand, the RNC offered an open invitation for Americans of all backgrounds. Young, minorities, females in particular, were all showcased throughout the entire convention, and it really gave everyone an opportunity to see themselves as a conservative in a new way that they've never been able to before.
And you're right on, because even when I was watching the DNC, it was very interesting to me. You didn't see too many progressives. I mean, you did see Bernie Sanders give one speech. You saw AOC get 60 seconds, whereas former governor, Republican governor of Ohio, John Kasich, got something like 3 or 4 minutes. So I think that either speaks to the idea that they didn't want to project to the American electorate that the party is more progressive. I think that's really what they were trying to hide a little bit more as they try to reach more moderate voters. But this divide that we're talking about, it's more evident right now on the Democratic side. But speaking of John Kasich, it also exists on the Republican side to some degree. And right now, yes, the party is very much so united behind President Trump, but it is a little bit fractured once you remove him. I mean, there was a time before President Trump where a lot of people didn't know what direction the party was in. And that's why we had something like 16 candidates in the primary in 2016. So what does that divide look like on the Republican side?
You hit the nail right on the head. There really seems to be a growing divide on both sides of the aisle as Americans start to navigate establishment politics versus new wave politics. On the left, obviously, we're seeing that shift towards a more progressive agenda. But on the right, we're looking at a lot of populist ideology starting to resonate with Americans, really from all backgrounds, but who felt left behind by the Republican Party for several decades in American establishment politics. In 2016, we saw President Trump emerge as the one candidate who was really able to resonate directly with the American people. He talked to us in a way that made sense to us, using apps that made sense to us like Twitter, and we're continuing to see that throughout his presidency. And I think we're seeing a lot of backlash from the right side of the aisle as well with the success that that's had with the American people, particularly with politicians who have been in office for several decades but haven't had the opportunity to achieve that same success.
So often, too, when we turn on the news or we hear critics of the president, they make it so much anti-Trump that they forget about the idea that you're exactly right. There is a populist movement that got President Trump into office. He's not the cause. He's the symptom of 60 million people coming out and saying, you know what, I can't do Hillary Clinton. I can't do another 4 years or 8 years, whatever it may be, of these neoliberal type of policies. And now we have President Trump in office, and there is unity among the Republican Party, but there's a little bit of uncertainty about what happens after President Trump. There's a lot of people out there who speculate that maybe Mitt Romney will be the guy, or maybe it will be a continuation of the Trumpian policies and someone like Tom Cotton or Josh Hawley. So let me ask you, from what you see right now among young people and even, I guess, the current state of the Republican Party, what is the future of the party? Is it someone more along the lines of President Trump, or does it revert back to someone like a Mitt Romney?
Overwhelmingly, what I hear from college students, thanks to my work with Turning Point USA every day, has been a shift towards more conservative leadership rather than continuing the work of establishment Republican politicians that we've seen in the past several decades. Americans are really looking for people who are willing to push the envelope in new ways, to have innovative leadership, and most importantly, a bold voice that goes against some of the things that we've really seen in establishment politics throughout our lifetime so far. We're very used to conservative politicians who say a lot of things on the campaign trail, but don't actually get a lot of things done in office once they're able to be elected and sent to Washington. We've seen a big shift of that happening with President Trump in his first term, and I think we're looking forward to more of that as we enter into a new era of conservative leadership.
And as we're talking about this conversation as well, we talked about the divides on the Democratic side, we talk about the divides on the Republican side, and really it comes back to just people being unhappy with the current state of politics. I mean, people wouldn't be pushing for reformational change on the left if they were content with the way things are, the same way as on the right. People wouldn't be calling, demanding really, an outside politician such as President Trump to get into politics if they were content with the current state of politics. So does this all come back to the idea that people just aren't happy with the status quo at the time being?
Absolutely. And I think the face of politics really is going to change here in the next several decades. We're seeing more women start to run for office than ever before. More minorities are starting to run for office than ever before, and more young people. And that's the really important thing. We're seeing literally a new generation of voices start to come into the political arena, particularly with Madison Cawthorn, the youngest individual ever to run for Congress and hopefully gain a seat this November. And a lot more of that will continue to grow in the coming months.
I think you're exactly right. I think that we're in this bigger picture of a realignment that's taking place. We may not know it necessarily right now, but as you mentioned, there's a reason why Republicans are currently doing more outreach to black voters, Hispanic voters. There's a reason why Democrats right now are fighting for those very same supporters and even pivoting a little bit to moderates. I mean, it's something that we're seeing take place in front of our eyes right now, and something that we won't truly understand until the decades later that you're talking about right now. I think you're, as usual, exactly spot on. But Isabel, I really appreciate you coming on the show tonight and breaking down this issue. Thank you.